speaker is Marek Preiss. Marek Preiss is a chief clinical psychologist at the Prague Psychiatric Research Center. His research interests include cognition and human behavior in crisis situations. He is a member of Raphael Institute, and he will tell you some information about this institute. And the topic of his presentation is trauma and post-traumatic growth. Please, Mark.
Thank you very much for inviting me here. The life of Eitinger reminds me the life of my father. My father was a so-called hidden child. He was a Jewish small boy during the Second World War, and he was hidden in South Moravia, and because of that he survived. And after the war he escaped to Israel with his mother, but his mother began to be psychiatrically ill after the stay in different concentration camps, and came back again to Czechoslovakia, and for about 40 years she lived alone on our cottage. So we have a lot of traumas in our family, and my father, similarly as Eitinger, didn't speak much about it during his life, and we didn't have as children enough courage to ask him, because we were able to observe how painful it is for him. I am working also as a member of Raphael Institute. Raphael Institute is an institution which is set up in Prague, which was set up in Prague a few years ago, and take care for traumatized patients. We take care for Holocaust victims, and also for the second generation, and now even third generation, but also for any people who suffer from trauma. We have also a psychotherapeutic training which is specialized to trauma and how to treat trauma. I will not speak much about data today, but mainly about my experiences and only partially about data. I feel ashamed that I did not know who Eitinger is a few months ago. So I looked at the Web of Science, and I have noticed how active he was during his life, and how often his papers are cited. He was able to publish his research in archives of general psychiatry, and in Czech psychology there is only one psychologist who was able to publish a paper in such a famous psychiatric journal. This is Aleš Kolářský, for a Czech participant, and there is only one Czech psychologist who is cited so often as Eitinger, and this Professor Kožený, a statistician and psychologist from the Prague Psychiatric Center. My first experiences with traumas are from these years when I took part in a psychosocial program in Mostar. It was because of University of Kiel from Great Britain, which invited me and some other people to participate. So I traveled many times during 90s to Mostar, and spent a few months altogether there. And we had a truck which is on the left side of the slide, and there was small outpatient clinic which offered help for traumatized children especially, and also for adults. And then we set up a small outpatient clinic in the center of Mostar, and we suggested help for children. So usually mothers and their small children visited us, and we as psychotherapists were speaking with them and offered them some really basic psychological support and help. I didn't know anything about post-traumatic stress and about post-traumatic stress disorder. I was really naive and uneducated at that time. I didn't know, for example, the high likelihood that specific trauma could result in PTSD, and most of these traumas were quite often presented in our children in Mostar. I also didn't know much about the situation on site. I didn't know about about weapons and about artillery which was used in Mostar, and people there were hidden in basements for many months during the war. Yeah, it's not seen, it's not possible to see, but it doesn't matter. We had some supervisors from Great Britain, and they led us to ask children to draw experiences. So we asked them to draw the worst experience in my life, and I was surprised how concrete those drawings were. I have one experience which shocked me in that time, and it was that one small girl draw a very concrete picture on what was happened during the war, and I lost this picture. So during next visit I asked her if she would be able to draw it again, and she drew completely the same picture as before, because I found previous drawing, so I could compare it, and all the details are the same. So you can imagine how strong this picture was in her mind. Unfortunately, it's not possible to see, but these pictures are about nicest experience during my life, and children usually draw the life how was it before the war. So, for example, houses which were not destroyed, and Mostar Bridge, which wasn't destroyed too. The second program where I took part in was in Maglaj, northern part of Bosnia, and we were a bit clever after experiences in Mostar, and we again set up some outpatient clinic, but we invited students of local university, and those people participated in our center, in our outpatient clinic, and we tried to teach them basic support for traumatized children, and through them, because we do not speak Bosnian language much, we were able to offer some, again, basic support. And this project took about 3 years, so again I traveled many times to Bosnia, and I became a part of this team. Then I became very tired by the situation, and also I started to work at psychiatric clinic at Prague, and it wasn't possible to travel so much. So there was a break, and then I tried to translate some instruments into Czech. So, for example, we translated Impact of Even Scale Revised, which is a basic instrument in research, and which allows us to collect traumatic symptoms and to put them into those 3 basic categories, which are intrusion, avoidance, and physiological symptoms. Another possibility how to use our instruments were floods in Prague in 2002. Here are some pictures. Czech participants probably remember it. Prague was heavily flooded, and also some parts of Czech Republic were heavily flooded too. Water was almost everywhere. The rescuers should have to use boats, as on this picture. The metro was flooded too and didn't work for many days. And so we try to wait some months after these floods, and then we ask people who live in flooded areas and compare them in people who stay in Czech Republic in that time, but they didn't live in parts which were flooded, and we asked them to complete the impact of even a revised questionnaire and compare the levels of traumatic stress. As we can expect, people in affected areas have higher level of traumatic stress. We also divided the sample into participants with high level and low level of stress, and we found some differences. For example, participants with high level of stress reported prolonged duration of evacuation. They have also lower income and more often rated flood in 2002 as worst life experience. There is a graph which compare those two groups. Generally, it's possible to say that well, some of these participants were close to cutoff of 24 points, which is a clinical concern of traumatic stress. The second study we did after floods was a few years after the flood in 2002, and we worked with Romanis. And my experience was to lead two Romanis focus groups where we asked them about the experiences from the flood, which was a few years ago, and we asked them to report the symptoms and adversities they have at present. And we compare Romanis focus groups with Czech focus groups. And again, there were some differences. Level of traumatic stress, again measured by impact of even scale revised, was higher than in Czech participants. And Romanis were speaking a lot about important experience they have from the floods. And this is that the flood brings people together and efface ethnic disparity. It was the main experience they reported to us. Also, they differ in way of reporting traumatic events. They were speaking more about emotions, about family members, about panicking during that event. Again, the graph red bars are Romanis. Again, we can see that the average level in Romanis, average level of stress is close to cutoff for clinical concern of traumatic stress. 42% of them were under the cutoff of 37, which seems to be reported about really high level of traumatic stress. But from nowadays position, I think that these reports of Romanis were biased by I think that they were not able to differentiate between past and the impact of past events to present situation, and that their way of responding to our questions was really impulsive, and so I'm not sure that such high level of traumatic stress are really real. I would like now to speak a bit about post-traumatic growth, because for me it was something completely new. Before that, all the time during my clinical practice, I report about traumatic stress, about negative parts of feelings and behaving. So the term post-traumatic growth was something completely new for me. This term was coined in 1995 by Tedeschi, a psychologist who wrote with other authors the handbook of post-traumatic growth, and also a lot of other research papers about post-traumatic growth. According to the literature, the post-traumatic growth is a positive psychological change. So we do not have to speak only about negative changes, but also about positive changes, and result of a struggle with challenging life circumstances that represent significant challenges to the adaptive resources of the individual. Of course, that it's not a new concept, and also Tedeschi and Calhoun, this slide is borrowed from their presentation. They knew Eitinger, and they cited his paper from 1974 that some concentration camp survivors appear to benefit from the experience, and cited his findings that strongest predictor was ability to make a few of one's own decisions. When I started to read the literature about post-traumatic growth, I was struck by the fact how old this concept is and how much we can find in the Bible, especially in Old Testament, about this issue. psychologists who publish papers about post-traumatic growth also emphasize that personal distress, trauma, and growth coexist. That we must have trauma to have also post-traumatic growth. We translated post-traumatic growth inventory, so we can now use it also in Czech psychology. At the beginning of this inventory, which was announced by American Association of Psychologists and was on their websites for a few years, there is a whole questionnaire where at the beginning we ask about the time since the event, we try to localize the event, and then we ask questions about the group. So it's really a simple questionnaire with 21 items and 6-point Likert scale, and the questionnaire tries to put all the items into 5 categories, which are relating to others, new possibilities, personal strengths, spiritual change, and appreciation for life. And I will show you some examples of the items, and the participants should check these items according to this scale, where 0 is I didn't experience this change as a result of my crisis, and 5 is the maximum, so I experienced this change to a very great degree as a result of my crisis. So, for example, new possibilities is covered by items like I developed new interests, or I established a new path for my life. Category which is called relating to others, there are items like I more clearly see that I can count on people in times of trouble, or I have more compassion for others. Personal strength is assessed by items I have a greater feeling of self-reliance, or I discovered that I'm stronger than I thought I was. Spiritual change, there are items like I have better understanding of spiritual matters, or I have a stronger religious faith. And the last one is appreciation of life, where are items like I change my priorities about what is important in life, or I can better appreciate each day. The first time when I met post-traumatic groups was this example. We with colleagues in Prague Psychiatric Center had to provide a psychological and psychiatric assessment of female, which was 48 years old in that time. She was healthy before the event and with no contact with psychiatry. And in 2004 she was hit by a car, and she lost her leg under knee, and she was fully disabled after that event. And from that event she received long-term psychiatric care. She was treated by antidepressants and other pills, and there was a long-term litigation with health insurance company, and she wanted about 10 higher money than health insurance company wanted to give her. So it was a really long-term litigation, and her psychiatrist, because she started to visit the psychiatrist immediately after that event, realized that she is anxious, also depressive, and the final diagnosis was post-traumatic stress syndrome. There was one forensic report about PTSD, because the health insurance company didn't believe that she suffered from such severe PTSD, and the result of this forensic report was again PTSD, anxious, depressive symptoms. And then we finally did a psychological report for the court, and again the result was PTSD. I first asked her, I'm sorry, it's not seen, to complete impact of event scale revised, and most of her answers were in middle range, moderately. Some were really severe, so nothing new. It's expected, and it's only questionnaire. She can write whatever she likes, and then of course we speak about it. But I asked her also to complete post-traumatic růst inventory. Again, I'm sorry that it's not seen, and I was totally surprised. It was included in that report. Now, today, after years, I would include it, and I'm sure that it would be understandable, but I was so shocked that I didn't include it. And I started to read papers about similar situations. So, for example, here is mentioned Harms and Talbot about road traumas, and the results are completely the same as mine. Psychological report that most of participants here, 99% of participants of the traffic accidents which caused trauma had some signs of post-traumatic grooves. And at the same time, most of them report symptoms of traumatic stress, so that these two issues are combined at the same time at one person. I know that probably for you it's completely logic, but for me it was a surprise. I think I can skip these slides because there are some pieces of research. I was surprised how many papers were published in Norway about trauma, and I noticed that those papers usually combine post-traumatic grooves and also traumatic stress. And I was also surprised by papers who show that we need a relatively high level of traumatic stress to have grooves, and that small stress doesn't support post-traumatic grooves. This is the last slide. I wanted to announce, especially for Czech participants, that Professor Marek now early published the book about post-traumatic grooves. So we have a book about this issue, and there is much about the different instruments we can use in both clinical practice and research, and a lot of experiences from abroad and also within the Czech Republic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for positive message. And do you have any, please?
I really appreciated very much that you referred to Eitinger's early work on coping. And it made me remember, that you said that the ability to make your own decisions is crucial. And how can you make your own decisions in Auschwitz? And he gave me one example, and that is what did you do with the piece of bread you got every day? Now, you could choose to eat it at once to help you survive, or you could eat a little piece every hour, or you could keep it in your pocket so that you had something to look forward to, But others would say, I don't want to die with bread in my pocket. Now his point was that as long as you make your own decision, all these decisions, are useful because it gives you a sense of control, perceived control, not real, but The second is a question that we find the close correlation between post-traumatic growth and post-traumatic stress. Why is it? I mentioned the super memory you have of severe events in contrast to everyday memory. Now this repetition syndrome, that it keeps coming back and back and back, it's an adaptive syndrome, and that's my question, is this to force you to learn? From erlebnis to erfaring, from subjective experience to real experience, to enforce learning. In that case, that could be a hypothesis on why you have to have post-traumatic stress reactions in order to grow. Otherwise, it would be problematic. If you manage without any stress reaction, then there is no growth. Huh? Yeah. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I don't know, but I think that it would be impossible to live with high levels of traumatic stress forever. I think we would die from depression or from high levels of anxiety. So we need something what change us. And this is post-traumatic growth. So I would agree with you that it's about learning and about time since event. And also there are correlations between between the time since event and post-traumatic roost. We cannot measure probably post-traumatic roost immediately after the event, so we need some time.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't give you a better answer.
It's the second question you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I'm also wondering about this high correlation. We find the same thing. There's also some things with the questions, so how we measure post-traumatic growth. You ask people, have you learned something about other people being valuable or acting nice, or have you learned something from others? And do you think life is do you think more about life than you did before? So you can't answer this question immediately after a disaster. You need some time to reflect and to have some experience in the meantime. But I also have some problem with the high correlation, because it should be. I think if the concept is valid, it should be some people that have a lot more of the positive view and not so much stress reaction and vice versa. But it's very much the same people that have the same reactions.
Yeah.
In both directions.
Again, I'm probably not able to answer properly. From methodological point of view, for me, as for clinical psychologists, it's much more complicated to measure traumatic stress, because I think that often people are not able to make proper links between present and past. So, for example, if we ask them through impact of human scale revise about the impact of even in past to present situation, quite often, it's just my clinical experience, they are not able to link it directly. And but for post-traumatic roost, for me, it seems much easier to measure it and to ask about it. So I'm not answering your question, but there is probably a lot of problems with measuring of these things. And for example, in my research, we applied questionnaire, applied structured interviews would be much better way.
Yeah, I agree.
And we wanted to be economic, so we applied questionnaires. But if I would have a chance to start again with the research, I would use structured interviews.
Yeah, because I agree, because I think we really don't know much about what's into it.
Yeah.
It's some kind of landscape that we don't know.
Yeah.
We should know more about what's kind of phenomenon it
Yes.
is. Yeah, I agree.
How do you make the distinction between trauma and challenge? Because I mean, we always believe that you grow from being challenged. That's what you're doing with the children all the time. You challenge them, and sometimes it may be traumatic.
Yes.
So when you have this kind of idea of trauma, we give the same kind of impact, and it may have a very different kind of reaction in the person. It could be seen as a challenge.
Yeah. For Tedeschi and Calhoun, proponents of post-traumatic roost, it doesn't matter. They put post-traumatic stress disorder, so trauma and different adversities and challenges and unpleasant situation in our life into the same package. So they don't differentiate it. So it's something different than ICD or DSM, where we have post-traumatic stress disorder as a disorder, and nothing else. And the concept of post-traumatic roost, where everything is taken together.
That's easy.
Yeah, it's much easier.
So some more questions, please.
I'd like to ask you, according to your experience, what would you recommend as a time between for example, this car accident and the possibility to assess this situation by the client or patient through the questionnaires?
It's hard to say, and it depends on individual cases. I would say that something like 1 year and more, but it's just guess, nothing more.
And Professor Mao?
No, we have data on that.